Hello, and welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. I'm County Commissioner Chris Jordan, representing District 1 in West Spokane. For today's program, I've invited 3 community leaders who are actively involved in regional efforts to address the urgent problem of homelessness. I'm glad all 3 of them have joined me today to highlight and discuss this important work. First, I'm thrilled to welcome back Fawn Schott to Spokane County Spotlight. Fawn is the president and CEO of Volunteers of America of Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho, and oversees several housing programs, including Crosswalk Youth Shelter and Hope House. Thanks for coming back on the program, Fawn.
Yeah.
With us as well are Gavin Cooley and Rick Romero, formerly with the City of Spokane, now with Spokane Unite. Over the past few months, Spokane Unite has kickstarted a community conversation that's all about breaking down silos to create a regional strategy on homelessness. They delivered their recommendations from a 90-day study period at a public meeting on June 28th that was attended by hundreds of people from across the county. The third member of your team, of course, is Teresa Sanders, former city administrator, who's out of town this week and couldn't join us. But I'm glad to welcome Rick and Gavin. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So we could talk for hours about this complex issue, as we know, and we can't cover every angle today, but we'll do the best we can with the time we have. So Fawn, let's start with you first. Your organization, of course, is out on the front lines every day, working with our unhoused neighbors. And since you last spoke with Commissioner Cooney on Spotlight last August, what's the latest on VOA's ongoing projects to provide safe and stable housing in our area?
Well, we've been busy, so we thank the county commissioners for supporting our young adult shelter, which is newly remodeled over by Spokane Community College, and starting 24/7 services for youth 18 to 24. Hope House is still running strong, doing well, and Crosswalk breaks ground in October, and we will be building our new site next to Spokane Community College, really engaging those kids in an educational journey out of homelessness and livable wage jobs. And then around our housing side, we've just embedded behavioral health as an anchor because we were really recognizing our folks were not getting access to behavioral health care that was really necessary for them to maintain housing.
Very exciting, and I wanted to thank you as well for taking me on a recent tour of VOA. It was wonderful to see your team in action.
Yeah.
And one thing that struck me is just how many LGBTQ plus youth you serve. Crosswalk can be that safe, supportive place for these youth when home may not be. So can you talk about the needs of this particular population?
Yeah, the national average for young people who are LGBTQ experiencing homelessness is 40% because their sexual identity is not accepted in their home. Right now, we're running at about an average this year of 30% in our community. So definitely have a need for a safe place for these young people to be able to go and have healthy relationships and experience, learn about what is a healthy relationship, how do you deal with your sexual identity, how do you learn about that and create space and community around that.
Well, thanks to you and your team for being that valuable resource. So Rick, you're a former city utilities director, and Gavin, a former city finance director. You both serve mayors of different political parties. I guess my question is, what the heck are you guys doing here? But in all seriousness, tell us about why you decided to get involved in this issue and start Spokane Unite.
I was asked about a year and a half ago to host a series on a homelessness solution series called Housing and Help, and really didn't know much about the issue before that other than what your average citizen knows. And in the process of hosting that series, we went down to Houston, and the reason we went to Houston was it was a city with really, as a large metropolitan area, the lowest homelessness rate in the nation, so it was just natural to go to a city and say, how do you do it? And having gone there, we saw things there that, based on my background and people I worked with, we knew we could replicate some of those, not necessarily exactly, but in a Spokane kind of way, and maybe begin to achieve some of those great results that we saw in Houston. So it became a great interest for me upon my return.
Good. And how about you, Rick?
Well, I've spent a 40-year career in public service, 28 years in higher education, and 12 years with the city of Spokane. And I got a chance to work with Gavin and Teresa during those 12 years with the city, and I think we realized that we share an affinity for trying to change government. And a lot of the way that we feel like you change government is breaking down silos and getting people to work together. So we had the privilege to work on a number of projects in our 12 years together, and when Gavin asked Teresa and I if we'd be willing to work with him on this project, it felt like something that really needed to have silos knocked down and get people working together. So we agreed to do that.
Good. Well, thanks for all your efforts. So let's take a bit of a step back. We know that we've got great providers in Spokane, including VOA and many others, large and small, doing really important work in the community. And we also know there's a lot of need in Spokane. Rent and housing prices have skyrocketed since COVID. So general question, but when it comes to homelessness, how are we doing as a region?
Not well. And I think it's important for us all to realize a lot of that is a result of a lot of success we've had. Spokane's become a really attractive place to live. A lot of people have come here. We have a low unemployment rate. We have a strong economy. Poverty has dropped. A lot of things have gone right, but in becoming that, experiencing those improvements, it's also resulted in us having like 25,000 fewer housing units than we need to accommodate all that growth. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's created a lot of strain on the housing system and the people looking for housing. So as a result, we're actually in the top 10 homelessness rates in the nation.
Wow.
And I think we all experience that when we're driving to work or just about anywhere, but it's a stunning statistic.
Right.
And so it's natural, or during our time at the city, we often compare to peer cities. So like Tacoma is a city that we often look to. They're 47% lower than us, Tacoma, Pierce County area. When we look at Houston, it's 89% lower. So the way to look at that is for every 10 homeless people we have in Spokane, they have one. I mean, it's not a little lower, it's dramatically lower. So that's one of the reasons we went down there. But Boise is 69% lower, Ada County down there. So no matter where we look, just about, even in California where we hear about all the problems, San Diego is about 37% lower. So we've got some work to do.
Yes, 89% lower in Houston. Okay, we got work to do. Well, you may have heard that some people say our community is a bit too generous and unhoused people are moving here or being sent here to take advantage of the services that we offer, but that's not exactly what the data shows, is it?
No, and it's, we all have opinions about homelessness, and, I do too. But data, I appreciate, Chris, that you mentioned data, because you have to go to the data on these things because there's a lot of just visceral response. But the data shows that in excess of 80% of our local population, we do a count each year. It's called the HUD point in time count in January. We get those results, and it's very clear that over 80% are our people. And so when we look at that, we realize there are kids, there are neighbors, it's a much different dynamic. And I think it's really easy to hear things like, well, they're busing them in from somewhere. But I think probably all of us realize that doesn't quite even make sense.
It's not that simple, is it?
It's not that
Not
simple.
that easy.
And is Spokane really a place where if you had an option, if you didn't have family or some reason for being there, having grown up there, all the reasons that oftentimes we're in a certain place, they wouldn't be here. Right. So it is consistently above 80%, and it's the same in Houston and all the cities we've gone to. It's a little higher in a couple cities where they have dramatically different, systems for a variety of reasons, but Spokane's not one of those.
So you alluded to the fact that people have strong views on this topic. I think we can all agree Spokane's a very compassionate community towards anyone suffering, but we don't always agree on what a compassionate approach looks like to these issues. However, we may be able to find some common ground on the financial aspect of this. So from a dollars and cents perspective, why is it important that we start to make real progress on homelessness?
Yeah, as 18 years as a CFO for the city, and a long time before that, a CFO at other places, it was very natural for me to go to that financial place and look at it that way. It's the prism I look through. and very quickly, talking to the 3-term mayor down in Houston and East Parker, talking to the people involved in their system and the various providers, it's very clear that it's far less expensive to address homelessness head on, provide housing and services. Mm-hmm. And in their case, they estimate that somewhere in the range of $20,000 a year, maybe $25,000. But it actually costs the community well in excess of that to have them on the streets. And so people kind of puzzle over that. Like in Houston, they actually estimate somewhere around $80,000 to $90,000 a year. So that's a huge difference.
The difference between leaving them on the street and providing housing and help.
Exactly, Chris. And other cities come up with different numbers, but I've never yet heard a city say it's less expensive to have them on the street than to actually give them housing and services. And for one thing, a lot of the costs of housing and services aren't even local. They're dealt with federal dollars that are designed, and that's what they're intended for. So you have to really build a system that utilizes that. But ultimately, when you look at the cost of the criminal justice system, you look at the cost to the medical response system and all the other response systems that are dealing with this issue, it's much easier to get them housing and services.
So Fawn, I'm curious for your take on this argument from your experience. What impacts do you see in clients' lives when they have that roof over their head and some basic privacy and security?
Well, front door keys are critical. They're critical for us. They're critical to my life and to your life. It's critical to every human's life. A person can't heal. They can't manage their mental health. If they have managing severe mental health or even addiction issues, they can't do that on the street. They need a place to be able to engage and have a case manager or support system around them to help coach and teach them new skills and guide them to the community where they can receive additional supports, even church or senior citizen services, anything that helps them anchor. So that relationship and being tied to a front door is absolutely critical. And we see when people are accessing shelter versus housing, the first place they go for medical care is the ER. That's the only option they have, versus when they're in our housing, they'll call our nurse or they'll go to Chaz or they'll engage in a much less costly solution.
Good. So Camp Hope has been closed, as we all know, and we're starting to finally talk across governments and sectors about how we could work together on housing and homelessness. And as we've discussed, this is not just a Spokane problem. As we know, many cities are dealing with the same issues or similar issues, particularly desirable cities with rising housing costs and people moving in. And lots of people are asking, therefore, what's working elsewhere? So you alluded to this, but the example of Houston has come up again and again. So my question is, what has happened in Houston that has so many people taking note?
So I think a lot of people are asking, what are the operational or policy choices that Houston is making? And there's a lot of people who can speak to that a lot better than I can. But to me, the key is that Houston recognized if you don't have a sound structural system that underpins the policies and the operations, that those won't succeed. So I guess my two biggest takeaways from Houston is, number one, they recognize the power of integration. When you put your dollars and your thinking together and collaborate across jurisdictions, a system that is built that way can function a lot different than one that's siloed with everything parsed out. I think the second thing they recognized is that local government doesn't have to own everything when the funding comes through local government. And in Houston, they've made a choice to build a standalone entity to manage this issue. It's supported by public funds, it's supported by public leadership, but it's to a great extent supported by private and nonprofit leadership as well.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly not the expert. I appreciate you all being here, but from what I've gathered, it appears that Houston uses data sharing. They've got a street response team and a navigation center where they connect folks with housing and support services like behavioral health treatment. And it seems to boil down, to me, to that housing and help concept that you named in your video series. So walk us through what an unhoused person might experience in Houston step by step and why that seems to be getting pretty good results.
Yeah.
Or very good results.
A lot of it comes back to what Fawn was saying. They've recognized you have to have that roof and those supporting services to move people forward. And so they've housed over 26,000 people over the last 10 years, which is a pretty remarkable number. And they have really robust systems to make that happen. So we have a lot of debates about shelter versus non-shelter, and people saying no to shelter sometimes. They don't say no to shelter in Houston because they don't do shelter. What they do offer is housing and services. Now, in a short-term circumstance, like say if they're closing an encampment downtown, because they don't allow encampments downtown. And the reason they don't is they very quickly and effectively offer housing and services. And they do have a navigation center, and that's for 30 days or less. So say you close an encampment and say a few individuals haven't had all of the details sorted out on getting into a house, getting the services they need, then they'll go to that navigation center. They have someone assigned to them as a navigator to make sure that happens very, very quickly, 30 days or less. And then they've got them into housing and services. And when you come back a year later, 3 years later, more than 90% of people that have been given housing, given services, because of the follow-up, because of the good management, they're still there. So it's a very, very effective program, but it is about getting them under a roof and getting them the services they need to move forward, as Fawn said.
And the vast majority accept the help offered, right?
Yeah, so I think people hear statistics like, less than 50% accept shelter,
right,
and they'd rather have this experience of living on the streets. That's being offered a shelter. And
right,
nobody comes out of a shelter in better position than when they went in. There are no services. It's not a permanent home. You often lose your belongings. A lot of things go wrong in a shelter. So in the case of Houston, more than 90%, actually more than 95% say yes.
right,
Because they're not saying no to a roof, that's their own,
right,
and to services.
right. So Fawn, as someone who works with the unhoused in Spokane and sees how our approach is going here, what's your perspective on our community moving closer to a collaborative approach like this?
We need to get to this space. We're really struggling in that area. As providers, we spend a lot of time writing for small pools of money and trying to piecemeal a lot of things together, reporting data into multiple systems. The inefficiencies create an added expense and layer for all of us providers. And I think the other additional thing that we're really lacking in this community, we disproportionately serve people of color in our homeless services. And
right,
we do not have a lot of providers that know, we have a lot of providers in our community that know how to serve those, but we're not linking the funds and resources to be able to serve that population in a way that we really should. So we have a lot of key core smaller providers that really have specialty service models, that this collaborative effort model could really make a huge impact for people in our community.
So earlier this year, with the help of Spokane Unite, the county, the city, the Valley, Airway Heights, Medical Lake, and Cheney jointly called for a 90-day period to study and engage the community about this regional collaborative model and how it might work here. So tell us about how that 90-day period went.
So, and we can add Liberty Lake to that list as well, who also has confirmed their participation in this. But the 90 days, Chris, was really kind of an interesting experience, I think, for Gavin and Teresa and I, because we were coming at this as volunteers, which
right,
meant we really didn't have the power of authority. We couldn't direct people. We couldn't delegate to people. Our power really had to come from persuasion and influence. And so that was a unique experience for us. We started by asking the question why. And we felt like if we couldn't get alignment around the why, there wasn't a whole lot of point in spending time on the what and the how. And we were able to start with a joint statement from all of those communities that you mentioned, getting them to buy into the idea that we're stronger here if we can put our resources together, put our thinking together, and take the politics out of this issue. So that why really set us on the course. We pursued two tracks. One track was an outreach track with the public, which went through the full 90 days. And we had meetings and symposiums and forums and a lot of interaction through our website. And we engaged with well over 100 different groups and individuals that have an interest in direct and indirect in this issue. The other track really was around collecting data and research and doing the analysis we needed to go along with that public input.
So it was a busy 90 days.
It was a busy 90 days.
Well, there was a lot of excitement and energy at that meeting on June 28th, I perceived, from all across the political divide. So tell us about some of the recommendations you made. What was the final product that you delivered? And where do you see the conversation going from here?
So it was an exciting day. We didn't know whether to expect 50 people or 250, so we set the room for 250, and we ended up with 350 attending, which included most all of the elected officials across the entire region. We could talk for a long time about the recommendations, but they really kind of crystallized around the idea of creating a public development authority. That's a Washington option. It's not an option Houston had. Houston had to choose either it's all public or it's all private. A public development authority is a quasi-municipal type of entity. We've used them before. The public facility district that manages our sports and entertainment facilities is a perfect example of a single purpose entity that brings in public dollars and does a tremendous job of programming for the community. We didn't just hand them recommendations. We actually had a group of volunteer attorneys who worked with us to develop a set of documents to actually create the PDA. And we felt like that if we didn't hand something that was actionable, we weren't doing our job. So, like I said, we could talk forever about the recommendations themselves, but they were embodied in the documents we created to hand to the elected officials.
Good, and we're in a very active community conversation right now with many voices weighing in. Some of the questions that I'm hearing relate to the importance of recognizing, as you mentioned, the disparate impacts of homelessness on Black, Indigenous folks, people of color, the need for culturally responsive services, as well as the need to really focus on those experiences of people who have been homeless themselves. And I think that's a good reminder that we talk about this issue of homelessness, but of course every person living on the streets is a person, someone's child, human being, and they've all got their unique stories about how they ended up where they're at. The joint statement, of course, did call for including such voices, and you mentioned the process that you went through. So I'm wondering what you think of these concerns and how the community might move forward together in a way that really considers the input of diverse points of view.
I think it's kind of your great advantage, and it can also be something that a hurdle you have to get over, because at some point we have to come together. But all of these groups you're talking about have these diverse viewpoints that we need to understand. People need to be heard, they need to be represented, they need to feel like this new system is hearing their story, responding to their needs. And so that's a lot of the work right now in front of us. And we're also working against a timeline because we'd like to have this before winter. We'd like to have this before year-round set up so it begins 2024 with this new system in place. We don't want to remain in the top 10 homelessness rates. So we've got a lot of work to do listening to those really important voices and answering their questions. The leadership of this organization will be absolutely critical. People need to believe that the CEO, the board of directors, the advisory group represents their viewpoints and that they can trust these individuals to bring forward recommendations that allow them to be seen and respond to their needs.
What do you think, Fawn?
I completely agree. We need many voices at the table because the truth is what we're doing isn't working. Our numbers are growing. The people, more people need the services, need support, need housing. So the hope is really rooted in being able to join a conversation as a collective conversation where we bring lived experience, we bring our BIPOC community, we bring our LGBT community to speak to the reality of this is the services that I need as a human being, because no one came to homelessness on the same path or the same journey. They all came in unique ways, and we owe our community the ability to help people recover and come back and be their very best self. And if we don't do that with a lens of all voices and collaboration, we're never going to get there.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, but just briefly, if we can't find a better way to really work together as a region, where does that leave us?
So, Chris, I think really, if you look at this, there's two options. We continue to do what we've been doing, which Fawn and Gavin have done a tremendous job defining. That's probably not the best alternative. Or we can continue working on a regional, single-purpose, collaborative entity that tries to tackle this in a different way. I haven't seen a third option on the table yet. So I think our option is to continue to push on this, and that's what the three of us plan to continue to do.
So just to sum up, what does everybody see in a few seconds, the real opportunity that we have before us as a region?
Change is really hard, and this isn't going to be solved with any specific group. If we work too much from the left, or too much from the middle, or too much from the right, we're going to fail. It has to be everybody coming together, and of course that involves compromise. And so compromise leaves everybody feeling a little bit like, this little thing or that little thing could have been better. And if we do it right, everybody's going to have that feeling, but not in an overwhelming sense. But we're going to need to come together as a community. We do that all the time in Spokane. I think we're the right community to do this. And rather than be the top 10 homelessness rates in the nation, I dream of a day where people are chartering flights to come to Spokane and learn how the heck did we go from being in this very difficult place to one of the standout performers in homelessness, addressing this really human problem that we have here in our community.
Anything to add, or did he sum it up pretty well?
I would just say winter is coming. And we have multiple years over had the same conversation. So the opportunity is to say, this isn't good enough for Spokane. It's not good enough to let people be on the street. And we know front door keys change lives. And we have an opportunity to change a system so everybody can thrive and have safe and stable housing.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time. Sorry, Rick.
That's okay.
But it's a critical issue. I appreciate each of you and your work, and I truly believe we all want to see more people getting housing, help, fewer people on the streets, more collaboration across our system. If it were easy, it'd be done already, right? But the conversation continues in the coming weeks. I know we'll continue listening to each other, a variety of voices from business, citizens, providers, the unhoused themselves. Hopefully we can keep moving forward, come together around a plan that works for Spokane. So thank you to Rick, Gavin, and Fawn for a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm County Commissioner Chris Jordan. Thanks to you at home for joining us today on Spokane County Spotlight.